Just some guy talking here, and this is Christmas Eve 2020. It has been a crazy year, really, really hard in a lot of ways. Some interesting positives that have come up throughout the year for me, I'm sure for you as well. But we are square in the middle of the holiday season now. And with all of the celebrations, all of the family traditions, the presents, the memories, etc. There's a lot of cause for joy and happiness, but a lot of prompts and stimulus, I guess, that would bring us back in touch with grief. With a year like this, where so many people have lost loved ones, the country has lost so many people, grief will be a prominent feature of a lot of people's Christmas celebrations or Christmas or a holiday season. And I've been thinking about doing this message for a while, but it's a hard message for a bunch of different reasons, not the least of which the grief, I think, is very complicated to talk about in a way that is meaningful for other people. In other words, me talking about my personal experiences with grief doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate to something that means to you. So I'm going to try my best to bridge the gap or create a bridge from what my experiences have been to things that you may or may not be feeling or people around you may be feeling. And we'll go from there. So, in my life, I have experienced a tremendous amount of grief. And for me, that grief has been very difficult to deal with in a lot of different ways. But I have learned lessons from that. And the first one is this: grief is personal, it is entirely subjective. The things that I grieve over, the people that I grieve for, the reasons why I experience grief and how I experience grief and how it manifests itself in my life are personal to me. The things that I might find to be reasons for grief to you might seem not that important, and vice versa. And that means absolutely nothing to the person who's grieving. So, in my experience, when people have told me to cheer up or get over something, or it's been a very, very useless gesture, right? And I imagine that if I ever did that to somebody else, it wouldn't mean a lot to them. My father, who I lost in 2012, used to say that emotions have their own logic, and grief, I think, is foremost among those emotions in terms of the logic that they have. The things that I find sad, the things that break my heart, are things that are specific to my experiences, to my life, to the things that I have loved and lost. And so, somebody else telling me that I should not feel the way that I feel about certain things um, is irrelevant, at best, and not helpful and sometimes hurtful at worst. So, if you are experiencing grief, I would suggest that from based on that lesson for myself, that you go ahead and feel it. Don't judge it. If you grieve something, grieve it. Which brings me to the second lesson that I have learned in my personal life regarding grief. And that is that when you feel grief, feel it, accept it. Don't fight it. Don't stuff it. Don't try to run from it or avoid it. If there are things that bring up feelings of grief for you, I think that you should just experience them. That doesn't mean that you wallow in them, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But experiencing grief is an important part of our healing process. For me, sometimes that means that I let a wave of grief wash over me. I break down into messy, ugly tears. Most of the time, I try to do that on my own for my own reasons. But I let that happen, and then afterwards, I don't. It's hard to say that I feel better, but the feeling has less intensity, less momentum. And when I say don't wallow in it, this is what I mean: is that you can have grief and happiness concurrently. These two things are not mutually exclusive. I have been in moments of tremendous grief or impending grief, where I have found myself incredibly happy. Just like you shouldn't judge that grief You shouldn't judge that happiness. If you find moments of happiness in dark periods of grief, you should embrace them. You should experience them just the same way. And if you find that you're stuck in grief, I think that one of the helpful things for me is to just give it a time frame. And I'm not saying that I'm saying, oh, hey, I've got 3 days to get over this. I'm more talking about the emotional feelings that you have, the upwelling of feelings that you can have um, in your grief. And so when I talk about moments, like I said before, where I just have messy, ugly tears, um, I try to say, hey, listen, you know, I'm going to do this for 30 minutes or for however long. Maybe it takes less time, maybe it takes a little bit less time, more time, but I'm not going to spend the whole day doing this. At some point or another, I'm going to force myself to do something, whether that is a happy activity or not. It doesn't matter. Maybe I'll force myself to get up and wash the dishes, or go for and do exercise, or meet up with friends. But I try to put myself in a situation where it's just not that easy to be a mess of tears. And I find that that's helpful to move past the crippling aspects of grief. Does it help me? Does it make me forget or get over it? No, it doesn't. And that brings me to my next point about grief. There is an axiom out there that says that time heals all wounds. I think that that's BS. I think that there are certain wounds, certain losses, certain things that inflict grief in our lives that will be with us forever. They don't fade necessarily over time. They can. They just change. And there are things about that change that make things easier. So things feel less raw over time. Things can be a little bit easier to deal with over time. As the years have passed since the loss of my parents, I find my grief evolving into areas where I am generally feeling sad about things that I was really happy to have had in life. So I feel the loss, I feel the grief, I feel sad, but I continuously try to focus, or I'm more able to focus on the fact that I'm feeling sad because these things were wonderful and I lost them. Um, when my father died, I described it as having being similar to having my left hand cut off. Um, I can have a productive and happy life. I can do a lot of things missing a hand. There is no limit really to the way that my life can go forward, to the amount of happiness that I can have missing a limb. But there's no question that it will never be the same. There's no question that I will always feel a loss. People talk about phantom feelings in missing limbs, and I feel that with the loss of my parents often. I have these moments where I feel like they're still there, where I feel like I could just pick up the phone and call them, but that's not the case. And Time for me is the positive aspects of time have to do with the way that I have been able to sort through feelings, sort through the memories, and really start to eliminate and kind of drop a lot of the bad memories and focus more on the positive memories. Look, there are negative aspects too. When my parents first passed away, there was an overwhelming flood of people reaching out to me, giving me condolences and support, and humoring me, I guess is not a great word to say, but you know what I mean. When I was in tears and unable to function. As time has progressed, um, it's a little bit harder to justify to people why I'm still sad about something. I still have moments where I'm not functioning at the capacity that other people would like me to function because of my grief. And the further away you get from those losses, the less understanding that people can be who have not experienced those kinds of losses. If you are somebody who is in that situation, don't worry about what other people think. Your grief is your grief. I go back to my first point. This is subjective. This is what you feel. You feel it for your reasons. You miss the things that you miss. Somebody else's logic for why you should or shouldn't be feeling has nothing to do with your grief. So look, I'm not trying to be a downer on Christmas Eve, right? But I think part of the reason why these feelings pick up steam in these times is because there's generally not an acceptance for us to talk about sad things or be sad in these moments where we're supposed to be happy. Um, and that's okay, though. It's okay to be sad in happy moments, and it's okay to be happy in sad moments. These are all things that are part of the fabric of our lives. These are part of the reality of our individual existences. They are things that we might share with people around us. People might have the same loss in their lives. For me, that's my siblings. They also lost their parents, but their experiences with grief, the way they manage it, the way they go through it, are completely different than mine. They might share aspects, but ultimately they are unique to them. And so I do my best when I'm dealing with people who are grieving out of my own experience to try to deal with them in the place that they are in their grief without trying to impose my way of grieving onto the way that they grieve. So if you have people around you who are sad, I encourage you to just accept that and see that as something that is just part of their lives right now. Help them to embrace and deal and pass through their grief to the next part of their lives, and don't try to push it off from them. And if you are experiencing grief, I encourage you to do the same. Um, Recognize that you are sad. Explore why it is that you are sad. Experience the reasons for your grief. Allow yourself to feel that grief. And then try to find the positive aspects of it. Try to find a place to move to from there or to carry your grief to with you as you move to another part of your life. Don't stay in that dark place that grief can sometimes put you in, but don't ignore the fact that sometimes you're going to feel like you're there. I don't know if that makes any sense. And I don't want to do multiple versions of this video, so I'm going to leave it there. I am just some guy talking. If I think of a better way to talk about this, I will come up with another video. But I hope that you all have a happy, happy holiday season, even if there are moments of sadness and loss. I hope that you can look around and see all the other reasons that you have to be joyful, to be happy, that you have the ability and the energy and the support to focus on the happy memories of the people and things that you have lost, and that you find 2021 to be a much, much better year than 2020 has been for a lot of us. I'm just some guy talking, and I'll talk to you next time.